Welcome back to the channel, guys. In spirit of the best holiday of the year, in my opinion, Halloween, I recommend catching your opponent off guard and playing the Halloween Gambit. The Halloween Gambit starts with a very typical e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, knight c3, knight f6, the four knights game. The Halloween Gambit starts after the four knights game, and after the move, knight takes on e5, okay? You are sacrificing material, you're giving away your knight for basically initiative, the pawn center, and forcing black into a more passive and underdeveloped position. So black is going to take, and you're going to play the move d4. It is of course possible that black doesn't take, simply because they might look at this and think, something looks fishy, this is a gambit, I'm not going to play into it. Just know that knight takes on e5 is the only good move here, and anything else, white will have the advantage, simply because, you know, you just want a free pawn. If they, for example, decide to take on e4, there are a couple moves here. You can always just take that knight on e4 and basically trade some of the knights. But you also have this sort of cheeky move, queen to h5. You're very likely to see the move g6, blocking that diagonal and the mate threat. You can go ahead and take the knight on c6, simply because if they take on h5, you're also hitting the queen, so it'll just be an exchange of queens. And if black is not careful about how they do this, you will end up being a piece up. So let's just imagine knight takes on d8. If the king takes first on d8, then you can recapture on e4, and you're going to be a piece up. The correct move here is going to be first knight takes on c3, and then you actually have another little cheeky move here where you can take on f7, simply because that knight was a goner anyways, and he has his knight threatened to be captured. So if you take first, you can certainly take, but you're just going to take back, and you'll be a pawn up. A couple things to keep in mind here, guys, is that this is a gambit, and so the nature of gambits is that it is going to be more effective for players at lower elo ranges and at faster time controls. So after the move d4, black really only has two good moves here, the better of the two being knight back to g6. Knight to g4 does not work, simply because of the move e5, where you will, be hitting this knight and also simultaneously attacking the knight on f6, winning a piece. If now knight back to g6, which is considered to be the best move, you're going to thrust forward with e5. Like I said, the common idea in this opening is to continually harass those black knights, forcing black into an uncomfortable position, gaining space in the center, and gaining some initiative. So none of the other squares are possible. The d5 square is covered, the e4 square is covered by your knight. Black is basically forced to go back to g8, and after g8, knight to g8, I'm going to recommend the move bishop c4. And at this point, black has a couple moves. We're only going to look at, for the moment, what's considered the best move, which is not obvious, but d5, giving back some material, because this pawn is going to be taken for free. White has a couple moves here. The computer evaluates bishop takes as slightly better, but I think both are playable. Let's take a look at knight takes first. You have a couple options here. If bishop to e6, I'm going to recommend simply trading off the bishops with knight back to e3. If, however, knight to e7, not trading is probably best at this position, and a very common move you'll probably encounter is c6. So if c6, once again, back to the e3 square. Now, let's take a look at bishop takes. If bishop takes, you're going to have some of the same moves here. Very likely is c6, and in that case you have a couple options. You can drop the bishop back to b3 or the bishop back to e4. If knight e7, you're going to pin that knight to the queen, and if black is not careful here, he could be getting himself into trouble, simply because f6 is not playable. If f6, you're going to take e takes f6, g takes f6, and then you continue the pin on the knight, also hitting the rook, and that rook is now trapped thanks to your light square and dark square bishops. If that knight ever moves, that is a free queen for you. From here, you might also see bishop to e6, just trying to force his bishops off, but it does drop the b7 square, which you can go ahead and grab. Another move that you might encounter, even if knight back to g8 is considered the best move, is queen to e7. Pinning that pawn to your king so that you are not able to capture the knight on f6. You're just going to respond with queen e2, unpinning that pawn and threatening the knight. The knight has to go back to g8. Alright, so let's take a look now at the move knight back to c6. If you're playing white, you should be pretty happy to see this, simply because it's considered to be the worst out of the two moves between knight c6 and knight g6. You're going to continue thrusting forward, similar to knight back to g6. The idea here, once again, guys, is to harass those black knights, forcing black into a more passive position and gaining a pawn center yourself. So if knight to b4, you're going to kick that knight away. with a 3. Knight to d4 wouldn't be possible because it hangs the knight. Queen is covering that square. So two of the most common moves that you're probably going to see here is knight back to b8 or knight to e5. Probably more likely to see knight e5 just because, you know, it doesn't look very pretty putting that knight back on the square it just came from. If you see this move, as white, you should be happy because you now have the advantage, and you're going to just continue harassing black's knights with the move e5. At this point, I mean, look at these pawns. Look at all the squares that they're covering, and you know the knight has no other squares to jump to. You're forcing, literally forcing all of black's pieces back. So at this point you really are getting compensation for that knight that you've sacrificed, and white now has the advantage. And a very common idea in the Halloween Gambit is going to be putting a pawn on this d6 square, clamping down on black's position, and from here, you know, black is really in an uncomfortable position simply with this d6 pawn lodged in, you know, black's position, and has to be very careful because if you are able to get a check with the queen on the king, black is very likely to end up losing the piece simply because whatever blocks that check is going to end up, you know, being taken by the pawn. Alright, so let's take a look now at probably the most common move in response to the move d5. Black is most likely going to play knight to e5, and you're going to continue with this idea of the Halloween Gambit, harassing black's knight. You're going to thrust forward with f4, kicking that knight back once again. Let's just look at, for example, knight back to g6. What are you going to do? You're going to continue thrusting forward, attacking and harassing black's knights. After e5, black's really only playable move is knight back to g8, simply because all of the other squares are covered by the queen or the knight. So they're going to be playing knight back to g8, and then you're going to continue thrusting forward with your pawns. Once again, we're seeing this pawn on d6, clamping down on black's position on the e7 and c7 squares. So in response to this, black is probably going to take on d6, in which case you're going to take back, and black's best move here is going to be queen to f6, with the alternative being queen to a5. If you see this, there are a couple moves at this point. You know, a common theme when you have this pawn on d6 clamping down on those two squares is going to be knight to b5, threatening this fork, but I'm going to recommend playing the move queen e2 check, simply because it forces the queens off and is a pretty comfortable position to play out the rest of the game in. If he blocks with any other piece, you're capturing that piece, and if something like king to d8, this is just kind of an uncomfortable position to play in, I would say, as black. You can continue with knight to e4, protecting that pawn, hitting the queen. One other move that you might see from black is knight back to e7. It's not considered the best move, and once again you're going to continue thrusting forward, harassing black's knights. If that knight goes to any other squares other than back to its, you know, starting square, it can be captured. So he might choose to give back some material, but like I said, you know, the g4 square and the e4 square are covered. That knight can take on d5, and this basically just leads to a trade of material with you having, you know, a queen in the center, a pawn in the center, and this queen that can't be harassed anymore with a knight, for example, knight to f6 or anything like that. If that knight jumps back to g8, you are going to continue thrusting forwards with the move d6, and let's just take a look at c takes, e takes. Basically, black is already in a little bit of trouble, and white has the advantage here. There's a couple possible moves. Black might play the move queen b6, in which case you're basically going to take that knight and you're going to be equal in material. Another possible move might be, for example, knight to f5. If you do see this, I recommend playing the move knight to b5, simply because you're continuing to pose threats to your, you know, opponent, which just makes for, that's the whole theme of this opening, is that it is uncomfortable to play against. You are threatening to fork the king and the rook on c7. You might see a couple moves here depending on the elo. Honestly, at lower elo ranges you might see something simply like c6, just attacking that knight and forgetting that it can just jump to the c7 square. Very likely is probably going to be c takes, and in response to that you're going to continue with this theme of, you know, when given the chance, clamping down on these e7 c7 squares by putting a pawn on d6. This pawn is covered by the knight and the queen, so black might choose to sacrifice material. So if they choose to give back that material by, for example, knight takes, there are a couple options here. There's sort of a cheeky move. Instead of just simply trading down material, which is probably perfectly fine, you have this move queen e2 check, and very likely the queen is going to come out and block that check. You're going to first play the move knight takes d6, checking the king, and after the king moves to the only legal square, d8. After that, really the only good move here is to take the queen, and black has to be very careful once again, because if they, you know, this is lower time controls, they might forget about this. They have to take with their king, otherwise they're going to lose to the fork, for example, on f7. They're going to lose that rook. So you're going to have probably king takes on e7, and at this point I recommend just playing the move bishop to f4, protecting the knight, and you're getting ready to a long castle. Black has no longer, the casting rights, and you pretty much have a smooth game after this. If they choose to take with the bishop, you're basically just going to trade all those pieces off, putting your queen on d6, and at this point very, very likely is going to be the move queen to e7 check, forcing the trade of queens. So one other candidate move that black has is queen to a5, and if you guys reach this position, honestly this means that black has played somewhat well and hasn't made any huge blunders. So there are a couple moves here. For example, you have queen to d3 or maybe bishop to e3, but honestly I'm just going to recommend playing out the rest of this game as it is, and know that it is equal for black and white. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Just a quick reminder that I'll be putting out more content like this. If you guys enjoy it, feel free to check out my chess.com club, where I will be doing viewer tournaments, blitz nights with me, and then I'm also going to be bringing on some chess coaches and masters on the streams, so check that out. I put out videos every single day, and I stream nearly every single day. Hit the like and subscribe button if you like this, and I will see you next time.